Hello, y'all. This is the beginning of section 2 from chapter 12. We're going to be talking about campaign funding and political action. So, the beginning of this section discusses um, two candidates who were found to be guilty of, or basically were embroiled in controversies over campaign funding. And it follows two individuals who were found to be guilty of crimes related to um, giving illegal contributions or for bribery, etc. One is a Republican and one is a Democrat, and they were both in office in the House of Representatives around the same time. The first individual from 1985 until 2002, the second individual from 1985 until 2004. The first individual is actually James Traficant, and he was a congressman from Ohio and was really popular. He was known for his crazy plaid suits and his wild personality. But he was actually charged in 2002 for corruption and was convicted. The next individual is Tom DeLay. This might be a familiar name to some of you. It's a pretty familiar name to me. I remember hearing about this. I was in just finished high school when this was going on, but he was a powerful congressman who was a Republican, and he was from Texas. He actually became Speaker of the House and was indicted in Texas for illegal campaign financing, giving funds illegally to other campaigns. And Texas has some pretty strict campaign finance laws. So he was pressured to step down from Speaker of the House, and he did so. And under continued pressure, he decided to, about a week later, resign from his position in Congress. The case study in your textbook is kind of interesting, and it gives a lot more details about the crimes that were committed or what these men were accused of. And I would encourage you to check them out. Um, the topic this video is pretty interesting, and we're going to be doing a simulation in class this week, both Tuesday and Thursday, looking at how funds are distributed amongst candidates, the criteria that different political action groups look for, etc. And so we're going to be able to dig into this process a little deeper. Because of that, I'm going to move through this video at a moderate pace. Hopefully it'll be quicker than the last one. Also be on the lookout for 3 questions and answers that are going to be in your, or should I say, on your quiz on Thursday. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. So to start with, it's important to understand that election campaigns are incredibly expensive. And in order to be successful, a candidate needs to get funds from multiple sources. We're going to begin by talking about where the money comes from. So this is actually a question on your quiz. Let me see. It is question number 10, question number 10, and it's a multiple choice question. And it says, which of the following is the largest source of campaign contributions? And the answer is individual donations. Individual donations. So write that down and remember it for your quiz. So individual donations is the largest source of funds for an individual running for election. Private individuals contribute directly or help by hosting fundraisers to support candidates that they agree with. Contributions are also made by PACs. In our activity this week, you guys are actually going to get to pretend to be a PAC, and you're going to get to decide on how to distribute your funds. This is actually the second most important source of funds. Next, we have political party contributions. So funds are limited the amount of money um, that can be donated is limited, and so another source after exhausting the first two can be political party contributions. Um, a political party can donate money to a candidate directly, and they can also just use money to support events and activities for the party not related to the candidate. So that's another way that they can get even more money into this reelection. So, for example, if the Republican Party has given as much money as they can give to a candidate, they can then host some events that look maybe like, trying to think of a good example here. Um, you know, talking about I'm trying to think of a good example. Okay, so for example here, we know that one really important set of values for many Republicans is family values. So the Republican Party could host a family values event. They can register people to vote. They can get people very excited about the party platform. And it just so happens to be that a candidate in this race is a Republican. And so the party is not donating directly to the candidate, yet can still be supporting the candidate. So there's a lot of ways that a political party can contribute to a candidate. Finally, we have public funding. So public funding is actually kind of interesting. When you pay your taxes, you can choose you can choose to donate $3 from your taxes for this purpose, and then somebody like running for president can have access to these funds. It is not required. You do not have to make this donation, or I shouldn't say a donation. It's actually not a donation. So let's say, you owe the government $1,000 in taxes. Three of those $1,000, if you agree to it, can be set aside for public funding for campaigns. You still owe $1,000 whether you like it or not. It's just your choice if three of them are going to go into this fund. And a candidate, if they agree to accept this funding, um, they have to agree to some different rules and things like this. And so a candidate does not have to receive this funding. Barack Obama actually, in the 2008 general election, became the first major party candidate to refuse public funding, which is kind of interesting. He actually was able to raise incredible amounts of money through small individual donations. Again, that is the largest source of funds for a candidate. And this public funding is only available to presidential candidates. There has been a lot of controversy over the years that has directly led to some campaign finance laws and some campaign finance reform. And so these laws have happened. Some are the major ones that we're looking at started in about 1907, and we're continuing to be the topic was continuing to be revisited and addressed until as recently as 2002, for example. So in 1907, the Tillman Act forbade corporations and banks from contributing to election campaigns. And in 1947, the Taft-Hartley Act banned unions from making campaign contributions as well. In 1971, and now this is where you want to pay attention because this is going to be a question on your quiz, the Federal Election Campaign Act was passed, which required political campaigns to report all individual contributions over a certain amount of money. And so the question on the quiz, it's actually question number 9, and it says, which organization was created to enforce the Federal Election Campaign Act? And that is answer C, the Federal Election Commission. And it'll be easy to remember because the act is FECA, and then the commission that was created is the FEC. So they sound similar. That's how you can remember them on the quiz. There was an amendment to the FECA in 1974 that was passed that set limits on campaign contributions, and this is the act that created the system of public funding for candidates. There was also an amendment passed in 1976 that eliminated limits on campaign contributions, except for presidential candidates who can accept public funding. And in 1979, there was yet another amendment to the FECA, which allowed political parties to spend unlimited amounts of money on party building activities. So again, this is when we talked about how an activity is for the party, like maybe a convention discussing family values, and isn't specifically tied to one candidate or the next. Then in 2002, we had the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, or the BCRA, which banned soft money contributions for political party ads, and it regulated how much interest groups could spend on issue ads. And here's a breakdown of all of these acts. It is in your textbook on page 372. I've left it in here in case you want to refer to this when taking your end of unit exam. All right, this is actually the point of the lecture where we see if I can not run out of steam here. It's just fact after fact, and it can get a little bit confusing. But we've now made it 2/3 of the way through the video, so we are just going to power through, okay? So interest groups and election campaigns, all right? So we have political action committees, or PACs, which we've talked about in class in chapter 9, and now we're looking at them again. And the first PACs were actually formed by labor unions, which is really interesting. This brings us to the last question from this section on your quiz, and it is question number 11. And the question states, what is the chief purpose of a political action committee, or a PAC? And the answer is B, to raise and donate money to candidates and political parties. All right, so this is the reason that PACs were created. Let's see. PACs function by collecting funds and then distributing them to political parties or candidates. So in class, we're going to examine this a lot more closely. We're going to pretend to be a PAC, and we're getting funds from a particular interest group, all right? And then the PAC and the interest group work together to decide which candidates to finance and how much. So we're also going to discover through this simulation the leadership of PACs. So not every PAC has official campaign organization, and they can raise unlimited funds. So we're going to be looking at, having a finance chair and a director, but they're not an official campaign organization, okay? They're not linked to any particular candidate. They're tied to interests and interest groups. And PACs can allow interest groups a greater voice in government. Some people criticize this and say that it makes them far too powerful, that it gives way too much power to interest groups. And other people say that PACs are really important because due to their relationship with interest groups, they actually help bring the average person into the political process more and more. So this is actually going to be one of the topics that we examine this week in class. Another group that we're going to look at are 527 groups. Okay, 527 groups. So because of the limitations that the BCRA put on soft money, okay, other political groups have come forward known as the 527 group. They're a tax-exempt organization, and they were created specifically to influence elections. They try to influence voters' opinions about candidates or issues without directly calling for a candidate's election or defeat. Okay? 527s that operate independently and do not make donations to a candidate or party are not bound by the same restrictions. Okay, so this is just kind of a really interesting workaround with some of these rules and laws that were passed. There have been some controversies over 527 groups, and there's two big examples of this. One 527 group was known as the Swift Boat Veterans, and we talked about them actually in chapter 9. They attacked John Kerry's claims of Vietnam War service and actually really turned a lot of voters against John Kerry. They were attack ads that were spread specifically to have voters doubting John Kerry's war service. On the other hand, there was another 527 group, and many of you guys might actually have heard of this group, MoveOn.org, and they actually posted ads about George W. Bush, a Republican candidate, comparing him to Adolf Hitler. So this was a very negative campaign ad that did a lot of damage and caused a lot of hurt um, to George W. Bush. Both campaigns aroused tremendous controversy, and even though neither group was specifically endorsed by either candidate, accusations were made saying that neither opponent did anything to stop the ads. So this has been some big controversies. These groups have led to some pretty negative campaign ads. So there's been some attempts to reform campaigns relating to the media. So there was a rule that was passed under the BCRA, which we saw was actually passed in 2002, that tightened requirements on campaign advertising. And so one of the rules that they passed was known as the Stand By Your Ad disclaimer. And it actually required that all media advertisements include a visual or oral message that said who is responsible for paying for this ad. So many of you might have seen campaign ads on TV, and at the end it'll say something like this: I am Ashley King, and I approve this message. Right? So they the belief was that if people had to, and actually it would show my picture at the same time as I said it. That was the rule. And the idea was that if people were forced to stand by their negative ads, it would put some control on this. Let's see. Many people actually found that the campaign ads in the 2004 election were more negative than ever before, despite this rule. Um, and there's even a famous case, actually, it's listed at the end of this section in your textbook, about a woman who was running for office, and she actually used the disclaimer at the end to continue to drag her opponent down even further, saying, quote, I approve this message because I'm committed to a truthful campaign. It's clear that Larry Dietrich is not. So she actually continued to attack her opponent. This, not just ignored this new rule, but used the rule to continue to attack her opponent. Um, so that's going to bring us to the end of this section. Thank you for tuning in. And in the next video, we're going to start with section 3. And it should be a much shorter video. Thank you guys for listening. And now I have to figure out how to stop it. All right. Have a great